good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Research Center for Irish Studies International Academic Research Seminar. Our guest scholar this evening is Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon. The research seminar this evening is called The Reception of the Myths of Penelope and Iphigenia in Contemporary Irish Theatre, Marina Carr's The Midlands Trilogy. Now, our moderator this evening is Ms. Salma Al Saady, and she will be moderating this evening's research seminar. She will also introduce Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon. But before we do that, I will very briefly introduce my colleague and roommate, office mate actually, Salma Saady. So, this research seminar is hosted by the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and is organized by the Research Center for Irish Studies. And the aim of hosting this series of research seminars with Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon as being our guest scholar is to open new channels for research in Irish studies, as well as Irish modern theatre. And we have to thank Dr. Maria for the new perspective she's bringing on Marina Carr's work. I've also done work on Marina Carr, but Dr. Gonzalez's work, it brings in a completely different perspective, which I'm grateful for her time and efforts, and also agreeing to share this with the Research Center for Irish Studies through our series of research seminars. Ms. Salma Saady, our moderator for this evening, works as an assistant lecturer in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the British University in Egypt. She has an unbounded passion for creativity and interdisciplinarity, which is reflected in her professional and personal interests. And I can vouch for that, to be honest. The formation and representation of identity has been the central focus of her research. Her master's in drama tackled identity in selected works by Carol Churchill. She has also presented about the depiction of Egyptian identity in film, Shadi Abdel Salam's Al-Mumia and Dawood Abdel Sayed's Rasail al-Bahr in the International Conference on Languages, Literature and Linguistics at the University of Barcelona in Spain. Oh, yes, so you can talk to her about that later. Her recent research publication is a collaborative paper with Dr. Shukri entitled Shakespeare in Blended Learning Mode, examined effectiveness at the British University in Egypt, which was published in the International Journal of Humanities and Social Studies. Furthermore, Ms. Salma has collaborated with both staff and students in creating a platform for creativity by working with the faculty in launching the annual Arts and Humanities Day. Moreover, she has cooperated with an innovative team of faculty members and students to create the faculty magazine Arts Speak. In addition to her work as an academic, Salma is a designer and launched her own brand in 2017. Her work was featured in Daily News Egypt and Women of Egypt magazine. The main inspiration for Salma's work, both academically and as a designer, is her love for art, literature, and traveling. Salma, I leave the floor to you to introduce Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rania, for the introduction. Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon is an assistant professor at the Department of English, French, and German Philology at the University of Oviedo, Spain. Her main interests of research are contemporary Irish theatre, and she has a special interest in the plays of Maria Carr and her rewriting of Greek mythology. She's also interested in translations and adaptations of the works of Spanish playwrights such as Federico Garcia Lorca in on Irish stage. And also she works in teaching innovation. Her latest publications include the concept of edge in the plays of Marina Carr. This is not about love, this is about guilt and terror, Fedra backwards and forwards by Marina Carr. Speaking through another culture, Frank McGinnis's version of Federico Garcia Lorca's The House of Bernarda Alba. And when it comes to teaching innovation, she recently published Communicative Competence Development Acquisition using Content and Language Integrated Learning, CLIL, and new methodologies for teaching ESL in higher and adult education, virtual campus, e-learning, and blog. She has been a visiting researcher at Moore Research Institute, National University of Galway, Institute of Irish in Queen's University, Belfast, and Women's Studies Centre in the University of York. She has been the vice president of the Association of Young Researchers on Anglophone Studies, and she's secretary of the Archival Journal of Philology. Welcome, Dr. Maria. In today's seminar, Dr. Maria is going to discuss with us how the reception of the myth of Penelope and Iphigenia in Irish contemporary theatre, in Marina Carr's Midlands Trilogy, and in Ariel, which is another work by Marina Carr. I will start the synopsis with a quotation in the opening of one of the articles written by Dr. Maria. Myth, travel in time, and contemporary theatre offers new versions of the classical stories where the dramatist is free to innovate, provided he maintains the invariant core. And this is what is being examined in the work of Marina Carr. Dr. Maria is going to start by depicting how the Greek figure of Penelope, who is of course the wife of Odysseus, who stays and waits for him for 20 years and is always depicted as a figure of ultimate faithfulness, how is the figure of Penelope is echoed in different characters in Marina Carr's trilogy in Midlands. And the analysis of these characters, their articulations, and the spatial representation in which they wait, it highlights how it highlights the influence of waiting in contemporary Irish women and the different types of resulting immobilization which affect their agency. And at the same time, this spatial representation of waiting highlights their position of immobility and explains the context in which these processes occur. They're waiting for something, just like Penelope. Additionally, in Ariel, Dr. Maria will talk to us about the figure of Iphigenia. Iphigenia is the daughter of Agamemnon, and Agamemnon actually he angers Artemis, one of the gods, and Artemis insists that he is going to stop the Greek troops from advancing to Troy unless Agamemnon kills his daughter. And this is what Agamemnon does in one of the versions of the story. So she's always depicted as a figure of ultimate sacrifice. And this is also the rewriting of this character is addressed in Marina Carr's Ariel. And Dr. Maria is going to discuss with us the concept of sacrifice and its relationship with Irish women. Finally, she's also going to discuss with us the rewriting of the figure of Agamemnon, also in Maria Carr, in the context of this idea of immobility and what those women are waiting for, and what actually shows them into this state. So I'll leave the floor to Dr. Maria.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you very much for the presentation. First of all, thanks to Professor Shadia Fahim, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities of the British University, for hosting this event. even though she cannot join us today. Thank you very much, Salma, for such a wonderful presentation of my research and of my seminar today. And of course, my gratitude always to Dr. Rania for organizing this seminar and the previous one, and maybe we have some others in the near future. So I will start by saying that, as Salma quoted, myths travel in time, and contemporary theatre offers new versions of the classical stories, where we can say that the spaces for transformation and the moments of encounter and disjunction that we mentioned in the previous seminar allow to unveil the new meanings the myths acquire. And today we are going to refer first to echo myths, as Salma said, echo myths and the rewriting of a myth in the second place. And I will use the classical works where the myths were described in detail. I will make reference to Homer's Odyssey for Penelope's episode, and I will also make reference to Euripides for the story of Iphigenia. And I will also use the ideas of the acknowledged mythographers Robert Graves and Pierre Grimal, who compiled further information and references about Greek myths in their seminal works, The Greek Myths and the Dictionary of Classical Mythology. I would also address Levi-Strauss' concept of myth-theme as a narrative that involves the relationship between a character and a theme. And I would like to say that I am following here Jose Manuel Losada's conception of cultural myth criticism as an approach to the study of myth that involves its subversive representation in contemporary cultural manifestations, such as theatre in this case. And to start with, I would like to refer to two concepts: the concept of women in waiting and the concept of women and sacrifice, as two myth themes that will allow us to understand mythological references to Penelope and Iphigenia in the place of Marina Carr. Waiting and sacrifice can be understood as myth themes following the term used by Levi-Strauss that involves the relationship of women in waiting and Penelope in the first place, and women and sacrifice and Iphigenia in the second place. So to understand the first myth theme, it is necessary to recall how the classical myth was constructed in relation to the concept of women in waiting. Homer's Penelope used to go, and I quote, with her waiting women to the upper quarters of the palace, and there she began weeping for Odysseus, her darling husband. So the classical Penelope was a wife who willingly waited for an errant husband, refused to marry any other man, and was quite naive. And moreover, she was defined as a dear child by her nurse, a wise, faithful, thoughtful, but also heartless by some citizens, on the basis that, and I quote, she had not the grace to keep the house of her true husband until he came, end of quote. On the other hand, in the episode where they first meet after his long absence, Odysseus calls her wayward and accuses her of having a heart of iron when he returns home and first thinks that he has been rejected. In other words, she has not waited for him. Once they are reconciled, she is sent again together with her waiting women to the inside of her house, where she is significantly asked to stay, and to behave silent and discreet. Thus, it can be said that the character of Penelope has been constructed as a woman who faithfully waits for Odysseus' return, although pressed to marry any other of the suitors. Penelope is a model of fidelity, prudence, and ingenuity. Pierre Grimal compiled additional information about the myth in the Dictionary of Classical Mythology, and he explained the two versions of her marriage to Odysseus, two versions that confirm Penelope's lack of agency. In the first one, he says how Penelope, or he accounts how Penelope was given as a reward to her husband for the good advice provided to Tyndareus. While in the second story, Penelope constitutes a prize to Odysseus for winning a race. Grimal also brings together other episodes not present in the Homeric text, which account for Penelope's attempt to suicide in the sea and being saved by birds. And Robert Graves, in the Greek myths, traced her origins as the daughter of Icarus and a Naiad, and tells, coinciding with Grimal, how she had been flung into the sea by Naples and her father's order, but a flock of ducks saved her. Both mythographers refer Penelope's suffering, but also a sort of redemption or resurrection from water, which will be also appreciated in Marina Carr. So this trope is present in the Irish society, or it is my assumption that it is also present in the Irish society, where the Penelopean echoes can be read. Marina Carr Midland tragedies were all written in the 90s, when the changing situation of women in Ireland after the independence from Britain in 1922 was marked by the initial confinement within the domestic spaces supported by the 1937 Constitution, while men were empowered and dominated the public spheres. So the election of Mary Robinson as president in Ireland in 1991, together with the scandals made public about the Catholic Church and sexual abuses, contributed to make the Irish society towards a secular society, although amid ongoing debates about gender roles and identities. Amendments related to the women's rights, such as the amendments related to abortion, were approved by referendums in 1992 and 1996, where the referendum about divorce was passed. And the 15th Amendment removed the constitutional ban on divorce in Ireland. However, even when women in Ireland, when Irish women started to benefit from this changing, there was a sense that much remained to be done. And Irish women continued waiting and fighting for their rights to be acknowledged. For instance, the difficulties involved through the process of divorce were defined by women in these terms. You want to move on, but you are in a situation where you can't move on, making reference to all the troubles that were implied in the process. Secondly, to understand the reception in contemporary Irish theatre of the second myth that I will try to address today, the story of Iphigenia and the conditions that favored its renaissance in Ireland, it is useful to make a similar analysis and to revise the myth theme of women and sacrifice related to the myth of Iphigenia. In Euripides' play, sacrifice is unavoidable. Sacrifice for the community, creating an image of women as servants of their countries rather than as individuals. The personification of Greece is used to justify this, and despite Iphigenia's pledge, and I quote, "Do not kill me before my time. The light of day is sweet. Don't drive me into the darkness of the underworld," Agamemnon her father remains impassible. And he answers back, "It is Greece for whom I must sacrifice you. We are powerless against this. Greece must be free," end of quote. And the same idea is reinforced once Iphigenia goes from the initial desolation to the acceptance of her fate. Iphigenia says, "Artemis has taken me as sacrifice to win glory for Greek girls. Her transformation is based on her conviction that I have resolved to die. I want to do it with dignity." So in classical Iphigenia, sacrifice becomes self-sacrifice and a symbol of nobility. And consequently, the concept of the agency of women is affected, since this must be secondary to their role as representatives of their society, of their countries. Iphigenia's resurrection turns her death into a ritual and constitutes additionally an excuse for violence over her. Grimal talks about Iphigenia's life after the resurrection or salvation in Tauris, in the service of the goddess Artemis, who had saved her life, and in charge now of sacrificing herself the foreigners brought to the country after shipwreck. He also evokes the stories that said that Iphigenia was actually the daughter of Helen. Graves gathers the same information and adds that Clytemnestra adopted her for pity. And he tells about Iphigenia's life in Ariel as well, where she was appointed the chief priestess, and where, despite the fact that she loathed human sacrifice, she piously obeyed the goddess. So how is this myth and myth theme influenced by the context of reproduction? In this case, this is related to the construction of another myth, the myth of Mother Ireland, which started as early as the Book of Inventions, which tells the story of pre-Christian Ireland before the Celts arrived, where goddesses were sacredly married to men who would become kings in the ceremony known as the marriage of sovereignty. And this myth of royal initiation was necessary for the king to possess his land, but also, and most significantly for our purpose today, also for the queen, as otherwise she would become decrepit and unfruitful. So it marked the role of women as wives, but also as mothers, mothers of a whole country, since the ritual married the queen to a man, but also to a land and to its inhabitants. A first example of these powerful female myths in Ireland, which represented the country, was Mebd, but also Deirdre, grain, and later in the 18th century, the Sperivean or sky women, or in the times of colonialism, the figure of Hibernia, a young and weak woman in need of protection from the powerful Britannia. And the nationalism brought the image or the figure of Dark Rosaleen, who asked for freedom and embodied Catholic values. Catholic Ní Holaighean, an old woman who lamented the loss of her green fields and told young Irish men to recover their land by warfare. And finally, Mother Ireland, used when Catholicism and nationalism were closer in Ireland, as a mother ashamed of her children who had failed to defend her. So it can then be concluded that this iconografía femenina de la nación como madre genera un patrón de sacrificio, as Rosende Pérez, the Spanish scholar, says. In other words, this feminine iconography of the nation as a mother creates a model of sacrifice, as the mother who offers the martyrdom of her children for the nation and the children who die for their mother Ireland. So after this introduction of the myth themes, we are going to see how these are evoked in Marina Carr's plays. And the first play that I would like to talk about is The May. When The May was awarded the Irish Life Festival choice for the best new Irish play in the Dublin Theatre Festival 1994, it was set to center on a 40-year-old woman struggling to save her marriage and safeguard her family's happiness. Other reviews of the play that same year started to see more clear links to Penelope's story and the concept of waiting, the myth theme. Michael Coveney, for instance, read the same performance as an occasion where the heart sinks at the sight of the May mooning around her new Connemara house. On the other hand, Fintan O'Toole considered the first performance of the play as a great contribution from Carr to the new generation of Irish theatre that was finding a space in that time, and described the May as a woman, and I quote, whose foundations are undermined for her love for her faithless husband and her family, linking the fall of the May to her excess of loyalty towards Robert, the Odysseus-like character. By 1996, reviews of the play outside Ireland made reference to the May as a wife in waiting, living surrounded by multi-generational pain in her opulent house, which she built to lure her husband back. So the play is the story of 5 generations of women in the Connemara region of Ireland, whose lives seem doomed to eternal repetition and waiting. The May waits there for her husband, who left years ago in pursuit of his dreams. And in the meanwhile, all her efforts have been devoted to the rebuilding of a house where her family life could be reconstructed from scratch. And when Robert returns, the May realizes her dream will never be fulfilled, as her husband has other aspirations in life. Thus, she and the female side of her family embark on this series of discussions about their past, present, and future, creating this picture of women struggling to escape the limits imposed by their immobilization. And despite the fact that their stories are not told chronologically, if we reorder the events, we can identify this pattern of repetition of Irish Penelopes with errant husbands within the familial context. So the Duchess, Grandma Fraukla's mother, was abandoned by her husband, who promised to come back to take them away to a palace that he got in Spain. And consequently, Grandma became a Penelope in her childhood, as she, and I quote, watched on the cliffs every day for the Sultan of Spain, and at the end of every summer, the Sultan would not have arrived, end of quote. Actually, she also was a Penelope in her adult life when she married a 9-fingered fisherman who died and left her, and I quote, with a yearning for all that was unattainable, end of quote. After her, Helen, the May's mother, got married to a man she did not really love because of her pregnancy, and he also left her to rot in Frankland. Ellen was way ahead of her time, a woman who was expected to go to university and study medicine, but who had to stay at home because, and I quote, what else could she do? It was 1938 in Ireland, a time we need to remember when the Irish Constitution had stated in the Article 41 that home, or her life within the home, was the space where women would be safer, and in addition, the space where women would give to the state a support without which the common good could not be achieved. On her side, the May leaves college to marry Robert, and the play opens with their reunion before or after, his return. And her daughter Millie tells how the day Robert left, the May sent her symbolically to buy a needle and thread. And from that very moment, the May, and I quote, set about looking for that magic thread that would stitch us together again, echoing Penelope's weaving. And Millie herself is the last woman from this family tree who suffers abandonment, in her case from a married man who does not want to recognize their child. And he cannot escape this Penelopean story of eternal longing. By reading the different processes of immobilization which affect the women of the play, it is also possible to identify the influence of waiting in their lives. If in the first play, we pay attention, for instance, to the physical lack of mobility, and this is sometimes articulated using symbolical objects that cause this paralysis. This is the case of Grandma Coughlan. You can see her in the slide, and the oar she always carries with her as the only thing that she has left from her dead husband, and which paralyzes her. And the funny scene where she and the rest of the women of the play struggle to enter the oar into the maid's house acts as an example of how women hold on to objects, that metaphor, the impossibility to escape. Immobilization is also related in the play to women's inability to succeed in their careers. Robert has stopped the maid from achieving or succeeding in her professional anxieties, and before her, Ellen had to give up her career also to raise her children. And fighting this immobilization is problematic, although women try to do so through their ability for storytelling and fantasy to try to escape the reality. However, they fail and show their chronic inability to imagine freedom. And the efforts to escape reality does not alleviate their suffering, since the storytelling makes them to long for something, makes them long for something extraordinary to happen that will never take place or happen in the end. Spatial representations of waiting add to the picture. In this case, they are the house and the old lake. Her home was the maid's great effort created as a place for illusion and family life, only to end up constituting her prison and being dark, formless, and the kind of house you build when you have nowhere left to go. And moreover, within the house, there is this lack of female solidarity, which contributes to the isolation of women. The lake on the other side, which is said to have damaged air, acquires a mythological scope by the Dinse Ancha, or mythological legend attached to it, which echoes of its metamorphosis and tells the story of Coilte, the daughter of the mountain god, who falls in love with Blood, the lord of the flowers. And when they are separated, because Blood has to go, Coilte will end up dying of longing and dissolving into the lake of tears that she herself had formed, echoing the maid's own death in water that happens by the end of the play. And to move on to the second play from the Midland tragedies, Portia Coughlan, I will start by saying that it was first produced in the Peacock Theatre in Dublin, 1996. And although Portia Coughlan has been linked to the myths of Antigone and Electra, and also said to be based on the Oresteia, unrelated to the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris too, and the story of Byblis and Kaunos and of its metamorphosis, it can also be read, or it is my assumption that it can also be read in terms of the Penelopean myth theme related to the concept of women in waiting. And I'm saying this because Portia lives in this Belmont Valley with her husband and children, and shares her life with her family. She married at 17 and had 3 boys, and she feels that she has been wooed into motherhood by her husband. And as well as all the female protagonists from the Midlands trilogy, she's also waiting for a return and immobilized by this. In this case, she's haunted by her dead twin brother, who died 15 years earlier and who ghosts her. Women's halt in this play is again caused by men. Portia's father forced her to give up college and to marry Raphael, and since then Portia has felt lonely and, in her own words, stuck here for all eternity. Raphael also tries to stop her through familial bonds, although Portia constantly reminds him it hasn't worked. The errant Odyssean figure, as I just mentioned, is symbolized here through her close connection with her lost brother, Gabriel, with whom she shares this link since they were born. Portia believes that you are either two people or you are no one. And when Portia and Gabriel were severed, he promised her to come back and keep coming back until I have you. And since then, Portia has felt this, and I quote, mourning of his loss and hunger for their togetherness, becoming a haunted Penelope, and also a rebellious one, since she escapes now from home, the inside, and goes to the outdoors, in this case, the banks of the river and the bar of the high chaparral, where she can be a rebel woman. The spaces are again relevant to understand the myth theme in this play. At home, Portia stands, as the maid did, they are drinking, lost looking, listening to Gabriel's voice, in a house that is, in her own words, creaking like a coffin, and where she feels that she can't breathe anymore, echoing the maid's feelings of imprisonment. The banks of the river Belmont are the place where she longs for Gabriel to come back and take her with him. The space for waiting here is linked to the place where the awaited ones are disappeared. As it happened in the May, landscapes are also protagonists. And the Belmont Valley plays the same role the old lake did in the previous play in the May. If the lake was damaged, the valley is also said here to be, and I quote, the dungeon of the fallen world. And the Dinse Ancha this time tells a story of a witch rejected by the community and saved by the god Bel. Again, the legend acts as a premonition of what will happen to Portia, who is considered dark and different by the others, and who will finally be reunited with her true love, Gabriel, in the river Belmont. The lake and the water, which also had relevance in Grimal and Graves' Penelopean episodes, becomes the element through which the separated ones achieve reunion again, as Portia will also end up drowning herself in the river. To conclude the revision of the Midland trilogy, we have already discussed by the Book of Cats in the previous seminar as a rewriting of the myth of Medea, but it's also possible to identify in her the myth theme of women in waiting. By the Book of Cats tells the story of Hester Swain, as we said, this Irish tinker who is stuck again in this case in the bog of Offaly and suffers the loss of Carthage, her husband. It was first premiered 1998 at the Abbey Theatre, and Hester was defined then as a woman who is, and I quote, deprived and trapped and doomed. Her longing is now related to the figure of her mother apart from Carthage. This is what will cause her paralysis, her acts of revenge, and the logical consequence, her inability to move on. The play opens with Hester being warned that she will die unless she leaves the bog where she is waiting for her mother, Big Josie Swain, to return. But Hester refuses, stating that, and I quote, everything I'm connected to is here. Hester's bonds are mainly to Carthage and her mother, both of whom can be identified with errant characters who left again looking for their own dreams. And the connection between mother and daughter acquires a more prominent role in this play. Hester was abandoned when she was only 7, and she has idolized her mother since then, despite all the negative depictions she gets from the community about her mother. Josie Swain was her mother, defined as a great one for the posing, another Penelope, described as a weaver and the greatest son stitcher ever to have passed through this place. Often seen crooning towards Orion in a language I have never heard before or since. She ran off, leaving Hester behind and asking her to wait as a Penelope. I quote, and I watched her walk away from me across the Bog of Cats, and across the Bog of Cats I watched her return. So it is that remembrance which causes that Hester feels There is a longing in me for her that won't quell the whole time. And her inability to move on the grounds of her mother's promise to come back. As we said, Hester is also linked to Carthage in a particular way. Hester says our bond is harder, like two rocks we are grinding off one another, and maybe the closer for that. And when she finally understands that their reunion will not take place, she enacts her revenge. The effects of waiting and immobilization in Hester are devastating. Her desperation, caused by the longing for a resolution that will never happen, results in her transformation into and I quote, a big lump of meanness and bad thoughts. When she is reminded of the fact that her mother will not come back and understands that she has lost Carthage, her wild and dark side bursts, and her daughter Josie's words will precipitate the final tragedy when she says, "Ma'am, I'd been watching for you all the time long by the back of cards. I'd been hoping and waiting and praying for you to return." At this very moment, Hester understands that her daughter is about to repeat the Penelopean pattern. And when she kills her, she's trying to prevent this. As Hester says, and I quote, "I won't have you as I was, waiting a lifetime for someone to return." Because they don't, Josie, they don't. And after this, she kills her daughter. So after having seen how the main theme of women and waiting in the figure of Penelope is written by Carr, I would like to conclude the seminar with a brief analysis of the second main theme, women and sacrifice, related to the figure of Iphigenia, written also by Carr in her play Ariel. And in this slide, we have two relevant quotes from Iphigenia in the classical version that we mentioned before, that represent this relationship that existed between the concept of sacrifice, the personification of the country, and the role of women within this bond. And it is precisely this idea of women and sacrifice that Marina Carr dismantles in her version. After the Midlands trilogy, Marina Carr turns to Iphigenia to revisit the myth. In Ariel, Marina Carr presents the audience another of her disarrayed, decadent, and upsetting sagas, the Figurals. Over 10 years during the Celtic Tiger, who live in a house surrounded by Greek columns. In the first act, Fermoy Figural, his wife, and other members of his family celebrate Ariel Iphigenia's 16th birthday. And very early in the drama, we learn about Fermoy's political ambitions, as well as his desire for power. And Fermoy's self-assurance is based on an exchange with God, and he introduces the concept of sacrifice. For Fermoy, the Irish Agamemnon, power, it's mine for the taking, I know it is. It all needs on my part is a sacrifice, end of quote. So though we do not know about Fermoy's intention to kill his daughter Ariel until the second act, Carr has already built the Greek altar, and Fermoy Agamemnon is the main protagonist of this first act of the play. Both reputation and sacrifice are now related to the unstoppable ambition of politicians who are tired of the demands of the poor, the tinkers, the refugees, women, as Fermoy says. So it's not an excuse as it was in the classical version. The use of rhetoric confirms the depiction of Fermoy as a cruel Agamemnon, if the classical counterpart's rhetoric was very much based on his doubts about the killing of Iphigenia or his duties as a public servant and a member of nobility. This has disappeared in Carr's version. Moderation is not a quality that Fermoy shares with Agamemnon. In his own words, and I quote, "I refuse to spend any more of my life on the margins," end of quote. And in Act 2, when 10 years have passed, we learn that Fermoy has held 3 ministries, has been involved in political scandals and confirming his lack of morality. His ambition has not diminished, and he continues using the concept of the sacrifice as a lame excuse through rhetoric now. This rhetoric is now destined to try to disguise his intention in the form of press conferences where spin doctrine is evoking as a dirty strategy to achieve power in a contemporary island, we need to remember, where the Celtic tiger had given way to recession and economic crisis. And this was very closely related to the corruption of some. On the other side, Iphigenia, Ariel, is not addressed in this play until Act 2, and she's now a character linked to the supernatural. She appears in ghostly form when they are commemorating the 10th anniversary of her death. So what Carr is doing here is offering the thoughts of Iphigenia after her death. Iphigenia, or Ariel, is not happy to have died for her country. In fact, she asks her father to bring her back to life, as you can read in the quote in the slide. Come and get me, will you? It's awful here. I want to go home. I just want to go home. In Act 3, strong women who refuse to accept their classical stories are revealed, and Marina Carr leaves aside the original plot of Iphigenia now, turns to Aeschylus or Aeschylus. The focus at this point is on the struggle between the mother and the daughter, Frances, Clytemnestra, and Elaine, Electra. And Frances will kill Fermoy and Elaine after saying, I am Ariel. Despite all the misfortunes, Frances refuses to conform, and she closes the play saying, I'll rise again in spite of your efforts to wipe the ground with me. So Carr rewrites the character here, the character of Clytemnestra. And to conclude, I think I'm okay. I would like to conclude with some bibliography and possibilities for further research. I have included 2 of my articles that I have used for this, and as other research possibilities, I suggest to study other versions of the Penelopean myth in Irish contemporary theatre, Penelope, for instance, by Enda Walsh, and other versions of Iphigenia, for instance, Edna O'Brien's or Andy Hill's. Thank you very much. I hope we have some time for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salma.
So, yes, I'm just going to give time for questions.
Okay.
Before we conclude, does anyone have I have questions, but I'm not sure about the rest. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Maria? Okay. So I think I will start by my question, and then if someone else wants to ask a question.
I think Dr. Nagwa Sulaiman has her hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Nagwa.
Hello. Yes, hello. First of all, I'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Maria, and thank you so much, and for your fruitful seminar. My question here is with regards to the theme of sacrifice, women's sacrifice. Do you think that this is related to the feminist move and women's refusal to be a sacrifice for her family without leaving her career aside and waiting for her children to grow up? And so has that got to do with the feminist movement, in your opinion or perspective?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I definitely think that in Ireland, this is very much related to that issue. And I do think that Marina Carr wants to express that. if you read that, if you think of the part of the Constitution that I read, it establishes that women should be indoors and that family is the most important aspect for women, and it places the responsibility, the common responsibility on women to preserve family. Okay, these plays were written in the 90s, where women and feminist movements in Ireland were fighting for the rights related to divorce and related to abortion and many issues related to their freedom. So I do think that Marina Carr wanted to represent that. And even in more recent plays, Marina Carr continues asking for the revision of those concepts related to, for instance, the construction of the feminine iconography of all these feminine myths related to women representing their countries, okay, rather than having the possibility to have an existence as individuals rather than as representations of the common good. And that common good can be the country, but can also be the family or the familial context.
Yes, so thank you very much. So we could understand sacrifice here is that they sacrifice their careers for the sake of their family and for the sake of the country.
Yes. In this place at least, yes, I think so. Okay. Although then in Ariel also the idea of sacrifice is very much related to if you think about why Marina Carr puts the emphasis in Ariel in the figure of Fermoy Agamemnon, sacrifice related to the corruption of politicians and used as an excuse in that case for let's say executing that violence over women or being violent towards women. I didn't make reference to other aspects related to Fermoy, but he is also depicted, or violence between men and women was also depicted in the play, which is something also that I think was related to the situation in Ireland, where especially in rural islands, they had a problem of violence between or in domestic spaces. Okay.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions? Okay. So I can start by asking my question, and if someone else wants to participate, yes. Now I noticed that there is a pattern of women being abandoned and in a state of waiting, especially in the trilogy, and they're being shoved into this state, crippling state of immobility, and whenever they try to get out, they fail. So I want to ask, how is this, and the endings are very tragic one way or another, and they seem to be in a state that they can't get out of. So I want to ask, how does this empower them?
Okay, despite the fact that the endings of Marina Carr plays, especially in the Midland tragedies, have been read as very negative for women because they end up killing themselves, usually dying in water. I do also believe that when women construct, the presence of the stories and legends and myths is overwhelming in these three plays, okay, from my perspective. So when I explain today the presence of the Diseanchas, or those myths which are in Ireland related to landscapes, and where when I explain that Marina Carr introduces those myths in the plays, and then women end up dying in those lakes, in those watery spaces, it is my assumption also that they sort of are redeemed or are reborn in those mythological spaces, so they have another existence, okay, although that existence is outside the real world, the real realm. So what Marina Carr is suggesting maybe is that they could exist, okay, not in the real world, because the real world does not accept women that are different, or women that do not conform, or women that do not want to be sacrificed, okay, but they exist in those worlds of fantasy and myth that they create. Okay, so in that way, they can be redeemed, okay? And these are the what I call the Irish tragedies of Marina Carr, but in the other place that he wrote most recently, the construction of women has changed, okay? And for instance, she has written also the story of Phaedra in Phaedra Backwards, and she has written also about the myth of Hecuba in her play Hecuba. And in those two plays, women are very, very strong. She completely redeems the mythological characters in those two plays. And in 2019, she has published a wonderful version of Federico García Lorca, Blood Wedding. I don't know if you have some knowledge about this playwright, but Blood Wedding is also a story about women in Spain in the rural spaces. And Marina Carr rewrites also that story, empowering women. So I think we could say that there is like a change between the plays that Carr wrote before 2000 and the plays that she wrote after 2000, and that can be related, of course, to the improvement of the situation of women in Ireland.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think in a way, when the character, for example, of Hester, when she kills her daughter, she's in a way revolting because she's trying to stop the pattern.
Yes.
I mean, even with the end tragically, they're trying to stop the pattern. So they're trying to revolt against the current situation.
She does not want her daughter to have the same life that she had. She's saying, I'm not going to make you go through the same situation that I had to go through. And I know you will have to, so I'm going to stop this. So is it an act of surrender, or as you said, Salma, is it an act from a rebel woman? I do think it's an act from a rebel woman who refuses to conform.
Yes. I think Dr. Nagwa has another question. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Yes, please.
Dr. Nagwa.
Thank you so
I think Professor Amal Mazhar wants to ask a question.
No, you're right. It's all right. I can wait.
No,
okay.
No, please, Professor.
Okay, please.
Go ahead, Professor. I'm sorry.
Yes, please, Professor Amal Mazhar, you can start by asking your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Professor Maria for an excellent presentation. And it's very stimulating. You just asked about Lorca, if you know Black Wedding. Of course, in Egypt, it has been actually translated and performed, and we are big fans of Lorca, actually.
All right.
And the House of Bernardo Alba. This is a fascinating. It's a fascinating play for Egyptians, for special kind of Egyptians. So there's a very strong link between the Egyptian culture and the Spanish culture, especially in the south of Egypt and the south of Spain. But this is my first comment. My second question actually is related to, you mentioned that Portia has been related to Antigone, but you did also mention that there's a link between her and Isis, the Egyptian Isis and Osiris. So would you care to explain how?
Okay, as regards the comment or your comments about Lorca. It's very, very interesting and very nice to hear that you are interested about the works of Federico García Lorca, which is my second area of research. And I have just found 2 plays which have been unpublished about Federico García Lorca and the House of Bernarda Alba, the play that you have mentioned in Iris Theatre.
Yeah.
And those were the 2 plays that I was discussing with Rania for another possible seminar that we will talk about. And related to the second question, the connection between Portia and the Egyptian myth, I'm afraid I did not have time to analyze these connections. I just found it very interesting because I had never heard about this connection. And Imon Jordan, who I'm sure you will know, mentions these connections. So, but I didn't have time, sorry, to go into these.
I was actually
maybe we
by
could discuss if you tell me
so
about the myth, maybe we can find the connections.
Well, the myth, the Isis-Osiris myth mainly revolves around a Penelope, let's say sort of Penelope figure who is Isis, but she is the epitome of faithfulness, of domestic faithfulness, and her husband, Osiris, gets killed and split into 14 parts and thrown into the 14 different Egyptian provinces. And as a very faithful wife, she collects his mutilated body and puts it back to life again. And she has a son by him who is called Horus. This is,
that's the basic.
The Eye of Horus is very important because it's whenever you find a medical report, you must have this eye, which actually refers to the Eye of Horus, yani as if he is protecting humanity. So the significance, I would have loved to hear the connection between Portia and Isis.
From what you have said, I think Portia can be connected with Isis in the sense that at the very beginning of her marriage, she was a caring woman, then she changed, okay? It was also interesting what you mentioned about Osiris and how she was, or he was mutilated. Because Portia's brother, Gabriel, was also mutilated.
Oh, so, by the way, according to Egyptian mythology, Isis and Osiris were brother and sister
also.
We're brother and sister, so we can also establish the relationship between Portia and her dead and ghostly brother. Yes, there is the connection then.
Exactly. And I mean, the evil brother, the other evil brother, who's called Seth, is the symbol of evil. And it's a very interesting myth. It's actually the most important Egyptian myth.
All right.
This is,
I think it would be very interesting, and I'm going definitely to do some research into this, because I think some relationships can also be established there.
You mentioned something else which has to do with the drowning of women. I mean, the women drown themselves. The May drowns herself in Our Lake, and I think Portia also.
Portia too, yes.
Do you take this as a kind of cleansing? Is it an act of purification? Is it what is it? Or is it are they uniting with Mother Nature again? I mean, what is the significance? Because I have been intrigued by this connection. They always drown themselves in water. They don't just kill themselves.
Yes, they enter water, and this is something that happens, for instance, also in Marina Carr's Phaedra backwards. Phaedra also enters water with the Minotaur, and the play says never to come back, but you do not have the impression that Phaedra is dying there either, or I do not have that impression. As I said, I think it is related to, for me, it is not a space where they die. The fact that Marina Carr relates, when I explain the concept of the dinse ancha in Ireland, nature, as you have mentioned, is very, very important, okay? And they have these dinse anchas or these legends which attach a space or a landscape with a myth. So they become, there are some spaces that become sacred spaces. So it is my assumption that when Marina Carr mentions in her plays these dinse anchas that sort of anticipate the stories of her plays, and then women end up entering those spaces, they enter this mythological realm, okay? Or as you said, maybe an act of purification, of rebirth, but definitely not an act of death or surrender, I do think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Nagwa has a question. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. I just have a question about, don't you think when the wife decided to drown herself in the lake, her decision itself was an act of power, since when she died in the previous days, her death was decided by her father's, the one killed her, and then her mother, both authorities, in the act of her decision to die or become rebirthed. This shows power, our empowerment, or different status of women once she takes her life or her rebirth herself.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I do agree with you. It's an act of empowerment for women. Yes, I do believe that.
In a way, I mean, that's the final stage. She doesn't need a father to decide to end her life, nor a mother.
They are taking their own decisions. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. They are taking their own decisions. They are individuals and not acting for the sake of a family or a community or
Mother Nature, the country, Ireland.
Exactly, Mother Island. Yes, the myth of Mother Island, which is another myth, okay, that Marina Carr is trying to deconstruct. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any further questions before we conclude? Okay.
Thank you, Salma.
I'm just going to conclude. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria. So to conclude, the analysis of how the myths of Penelope and Iphigenia are depicted in the plays of Marina Carr reveal the meanings that have been added while this myth travel in time, how they're changing when they're represented in contemporary society right now, the Irish society, by addressing the concept of waiting and the Penelopean echoes in Midland tragedies. It is possible to conclude that Carr is interested in elaborating a new type of tragedy that includes the denounce of Irish women's immobilization in contemporary society, as well as their fight against it. Within the same fashion, it is possible to read Ariel as a version of Iphigenia, which stops seeing sacrifice as an understandable and advocates for new strong women that search for agency and who reject previous sacrificial roles. I mean, when she comes back and she tells her father that she wants her life back, this is a type of revolt, this is a type of rejection. The rewriting of the figure of Agamemnon also as a corrupt political politician contributes to the celebration of these female characters who do not comply with men's rules. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria.
Thank you.
This has been a very interesting talk. And thank you so much, Dr. Rania Khalil. It's a pleasure to have been there with you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Maria Gonzalez Chacon, for your thought-provoking research seminar. Thank you, Professor Amal Mazhar from Cairo University, and Dr. Negwa Sulaiman from the BUE and Faculty of Arts and Humanities for the enriching discussion. And Salma, thank you for your excellent introduction and summary of Dr. Maria's research and your moderation of this evening's seminar. I'd also like to thank all the colleagues from near and far who have joined this evening's seminar and have made the time to engage in Irish studies and also make a contribution to this evening's enriching discussion. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you soon in our upcoming research seminars and upcoming events. We do have 2 conferences coming up soon. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to announce that with the support of Professor Shadi Fahim, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, the Research Center for Irish Studies was officially inaugurated on the 17th of November 2021 in the presence of His Excellency Ambassador Shauna Reagan, and a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Embassy of Ireland in Cairo and the British University in Egypt, represented by BUE's President and Vice Chancellor. So officially, we're now official.
Congratulations, Rania.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your time and for everyone's effort.